"You're going to tell HR it was your mistake," my brother-in-law said, like he was asking me to pass the salt. "Sign the correction form, it gets filed, it disappears, and nobody loses their job. Everybody wins." I remember staring at him across my sister's kitchen table, the overhead light making everything look a little too bright and a little too cheap, and thinking, he actually believes this is reasonable. "Everybody wins," I repeated. "Elise." My sister reached across and put her hand on my arm. "It's one form." It wasn't one form, but I'll get to that. "My name is Elise, and I'm a licensed CPA. I have been for 6 years. I worked my way through my master's program at night while doing bookkeeping during the day for a small logistics company in Columbus. I passed all 4 sections of the CPA exam on the first attempt, something fewer than 20% of test takers do, and I wore that like quiet armor for years because nobody in my family ever really acknowledged it. My sister dropped out of community college after 1 semester. My brother-in-law, Connor, never finished his business degree. He's been in sales his whole career, which isn't a criticism, except that he somehow believed it made him an expert on accounting ethics. When I got hired at Hargrove Financial Group 3 years ago, I thought I had finally made it somewhere permanent. Mid-size firm, solid clients, a partner track that actually existed. My direct supervisor was a woman named Patricia. No, wait, I need to pick someone not from the list. Her name was Diane. No. Let me just call her my manager, because the name doesn't matter as much as what she did. My manager was methodical, fair, and she liked my work. I had gotten 2 strong performance reviews and a raise that genuinely surprised me. Connor had been job hunting for almost a year by the time this started. He'd been laid off from his last sales position when his company restructured, and he'd been burning through their savings while my sister pretended everything was fine on Facebook. He had an interview at Hargrove, not in my department, not anywhere near my work, in their business development division. He asked if I could put in a good word. I did. I sent a brief, honest email to the hiring manager saying Connor was my brother-in-law, that I couldn't speak to his sales record directly, but that he was persistent and personable. I was careful. I didn't oversell him. I figured if he was right for the role, he'd get it on his own merits. If not, at least I'd done my part for the family. He got the job. For the first few months, everything was fine. Connor would occasionally stop by my floor when he was passing through, and sometimes we'd overlap in the break room. He seemed to be finding his footing. My sister would text me updates, little cheerful things. "Connor loves it there. He's already beating his targets. You were so right to recommend him." I noticed the texts tapered off around month 4. Then my manager asked to meet with me. She closed her office door, which she didn't usually do, and she slid a printed spreadsheet across the desk. It was a reconciliation report for one of our mid-sized clients, a regional HVAC distributor we'd had for 2 years. The numbers had been signed off 3 weeks earlier. My initials were on the sign-off line, except I hadn't signed off on it. "Walk me through this," she said. Not accusatory, just careful. I looked at the sheet. There was a categorization error in the depreciation schedule. Not enormous, but not small either. About $34,000 misclassified in a way that would have materially affected the client's quarterly tax estimate. The client had flagged it when they ran their own internal numbers and it didn't match. "These aren't my initials," I said. My manager looked at me. She didn't say anything. "I mean, they look like my initials, but I didn't review this file. Who pulled this?" She told me the file had been accessed from my login 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday afternoon. She showed me the access log. My credentials, 2014 p.m., the reconciliation folder for that client. I sat very still. I thought about Tuesday afternoons 3 weeks ago. I had been out of the office at a client meeting that entire afternoon. I had a calendar entry, an Uber receipt, and 3 hours of emails from my client's CFO to prove it. I told her that. She nodded slowly. "I want to believe you, Elise, but I need you to understand the position this puts us in." The position it put them in, right. Here's what I put together later after I had some time to think and stopped feeling like the floor was moving under me. Connor had access to my office. I had given him my spare keycard once back in September because he'd left his badge at home and needed to get into the building after hours to grab something from his desk. I told him to drop it on my desk before he left. I assumed he did. I never checked because I trusted him. He was family. He had apparently not dropped it on my desk. I can't prove with 100% certainty that it was him. I want to be honest about that. But here's what I know. Connor was under a performance review at that point. He'd been struggling to close accounts and his manager had put him on a 60-day improvement plan. He needed something to shift the attention away from him. He needed the firm to be focused on something or someone else. And someone with access to my login and my keycard had pulled a client file and entered a sloppy reconciliation under my credentials on a day I wasn't there. The math isn't complicated. That night my sister called me. She wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. Connor told me what's happening, she said. He thinks you should just sign the correction form and say you made an error in reviewing the work. He said it's one small mistake. They'll put it in your file and it blows over. I had to set the phone down for a second. I picked it back up. He wants me to confess to a mistake I didn't make. He said the client relationship is at risk and the firm needs someone to take accountability. The firm needs someone to take accountability, I said. And Connor thinks that someone should be me. Elise, he's been there less than a year. If they're looking for someone to blame, he's the one who should be blamed. Silence. You don't know that, she said, but her voice had gone flat in a way that told me she wasn't sure she believed her own words. I was at a client meeting that afternoon. I have an Uber receipt timestamped at 1047 p.m. that put me across town. I have 3 hours of emails. Another silence. Then, Connor says there are ways those could be explained. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was listening to my own breathing. He's thought about how to explain away my alibi, I finally said. She didn't answer that. We got off the phone shortly after, and I sat in my apartment in the quiet and understood something that I think I had been slowly learning my whole life. Being family doesn't mean someone will protect you. Sometimes it just means they know exactly where to aim. I didn't sign the form. I went back to my manager the next morning with every piece of documentation I had, the Uber receipt, the time-stamped client emails, my calendar with the meeting blocked out. I also had an email from the client's CFO sent at 2:31 p.m. that day, 17 minutes after my credentials were used to access that file, asking me a follow-up question about a different matter entirely. I had responded from my phone at 2:38 p.m. with my location data attached because I'd been using my GPS to find parking. She looked at all of it. She asked me to give her 48 hours. During those 48 hours, my sister texted me 4 times. The first 2 were gentle. Can you just think about it? For the sake of keeping the peace, the third one had Connor's fingerprints all over it. If you escalate this, it's going to get ugly for everyone and you'll be the one who made it ugly. The fourth came at 11 p.m. Mom is upset. She thinks you're being difficult. They had pulled my mother into it. My mother, who lived in Dayton and had nothing to do with any of this, had apparently been told a version of events in which I was refusing to cooperate with my firm and risking a family member's job out of some kind of stubbornness. My mother called me the next morning and said in that exhausted tone she'd been using on me my whole life, "Elise, why can't you just smooth it over? You're so inflexible." I love my mother, but I had spent 31 years smoothing things over, and it had gotten me a false entry in a client file with my initials on it. "Mom," I said, "I didn't do this. Someone used my credentials to falsify a document while I was sitting in a conference room across town. I have proof. I'm not smoothing it over." She sighed like I told her I refused to eat my vegetables. On the morning of the 48th hour, my manager called me in again. This time there was someone from HR and someone from the firm's internal compliance team. My stomach dropped when I saw them. Then I noticed they were looking at a different printout than the one from before. The IT department had done a deeper pull on the access logs. When they looked at the badge entry records alongside the computer access records, something didn't line up. The key card that accessed my floor at 2009 p.m. on that Tuesday, 5 minutes before my credentials were used on that computer, was not my key card. It was a card that had been issued to me as a spare back in August and that I had apparently never deactivated after lending it out. The card had been used 11 times after I thought I'd gotten it back. 11 times. I had to work to keep my expression even when they told me that. They didn't say Connor's name in that meeting. They didn't need to. I think the HR representative could see from my face that I knew exactly whose hands had been on that card. She asked me gently whether I had any idea who might have had access to the spare. I told her I had lent it to a family member who also worked at the firm, that I had asked for it back, and that I had assumed I received it. I told her I had no way to know when or how many times it might have been used without my knowledge. Then I slid my phone across the table with the text message thread open. I had screenshotted everything, my sister's texts relaying Connor's suggestions. Connor's eventual direct message to me, sent the evening after I told my sister I wasn't signing, saying, "Look, I'm just trying to protect both of us here. If you make this a whole thing, neither of us comes out clean." That one landed differently now that they'd found the badge records. Neither of us comes out clean reads very differently when only one person actually did something wrong. The compliance officer read the messages twice. Then she looked up at me and said, "Thank you for bringing this forward." That was the moment I let myself exhale. I'm not going to pretend what came next was quick or clean. These things never are. There was an internal investigation that lasted 3 weeks, during which I was technically under a review status that made me feel like I was walking around with a low-grade fever every single day. I had people I liked at that firm who didn't know what to say to me in the hallway and so said nothing. I ate lunch at my desk most days. I kept my head down and did my work and tried not to check my phone too often. Connor was placed on administrative leave on a Thursday. I found out because my sister called me screaming. Not asking questions, not processing screaming. "You got him suspended," she said. "You did this on purpose. You couldn't stand that he was successful here and you went after him." I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to her, and feeling something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something more like grief. Because the story she was telling herself, the one where I was the villain, was a story she needed. If I was the villain, then Connor was just a guy who'd made a bad choice under pressure. If I was the villain, she didn't have to reckon with what her husband actually did. "He used my credentials to sign off on a client file," I said. "They found the badge records. He accessed my office when I wasn't there." "You don't know it was him?" "The badge records, sure. Badge records can be wrong." And that was the moment I understood that this wasn't a conversation. It was a wall. I could keep talking into it, or I could stop. I stopped. "I hope you're okay," I said. "I genuinely mean that. I hope the two of you figure this out." I hung up. Connor was terminated 2 weeks later. The client was notified of the error, the correction was filed with proper documentation, and the firm sent them a formal letter of apology, along with a fee adjustment. The whole thing cost Hargrove a certain amount of goodwill and probably some billable hours in cleanup. I was not disciplined. My manager wrote a note for my file explicitly stating that I had proactively brought forward exculpatory evidence and cooperated fully with the investigation. My mother called me the day after Connor was fired. She wasn't screaming, she sounded tired. "I just don't understand why it had to get this far," she said. "Mum, he filed a false document under my name, and then he told my sister to convince me to confess to it. He was desperate, he needed that job." "I know he was desperate. That's not a defense." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Your sister is very hurt." "I know she is." "Are you going to reach out to her?" I thought about that. I thought about the 4 texts. I thought about Mum is upset. She thinks you're being difficult. I thought about Connor's message. Neither of us comes out clean. "When she's ready to have an honest conversation," I said, "I'll be here." My mother sighed again. That vegetable sigh. We said goodbye and I put my phone face down on the counter and made myself a cup of coffee and stood at my kitchen window watching the street below for a while. A woman was walking a big golden retriever who kept stopping to investigate every single crack in the sidewalk. A man in a grey jacket was talking on his phone and laughing at something. The light was that particular pale gold it gets in Columbus in late October, the kind that makes everything look like a memory while it's still happening. I thought about what it cost me to not sign that form. My relationship with my sister, fractured, maybe permanently. A 3-week stretch of professional limbo that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The knowledge that my mother will probably always quietly believe I could have handled it differently. Thanksgiving is going to be complicated for a long time. But here's what I kept: my license, my record, my name on documents that mean what they say. 6 years of work and one very specific kind of integrity that I didn't understand the full value of until someone tried to take it from me. And I kept something else too. I kept the knowledge of what I actually am, separate from what my family has always decided I am. I'm not the inflexible one. I'm not the difficult one. I'm not the one who thinks she's better than everyone because she passed a test. I'm just someone who wasn't willing to write a lie in permanent ink because it was more convenient for everybody else. I'm still at Hargrove. My manager, a few months after everything settled, mentioned the partner track in passing, casually, like she was mentioning the weather, in a way that told me the door was still open. Connor is somewhere in sales again, I think. I don't keep track. My sister posts on Instagram like everything is fine. Maybe it is. I hope it is, genuinely. But I stopped waiting for an apology a while ago because I realized the apology isn't the point. The point is that I know what happened, and so does every person at that firm who looked at the batch records, and so does Connor, even if he'll never say it out loud. He was so sure I'd take the fall. He had the whole thing mapped out, the form, the language, the quiet burial of a file error that would protect him and cost me. He thought because I was family, I'd absorb it. He thought because I always smoothed things over, I always would. He forgot one thing. I'm an accountant. I keep records. There's a moment I keep coming back to, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to my sister scream at me through the phone and feeling something settle in my chest instead of collapse. That's the part that still surprises me. I thought I'd feel shattered. Instead, I felt something close to clear. I spent a long time believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as doing the right thing. In my family, those two things got conflated so often that I stopped being able to tell them apart. Smooth it over. Be the flexible one. Don't make it a whole thing. And for years I did exactly that in 100 small ways that I told myself didn't matter. But choices compound. Every time I absorbed something I shouldn't have, it made the next absorption easier to justify. Until Connor slid my initials onto a falsified document and my family lined up to tell me to let it stay there, and I finally understood what all that smoothing over had actually been building toward. What I know now is that integrity isn't a principle you hold when it's convenient. It's the thing you find out you either have or don't when someone puts real pressure on it. Connor was counting on me not having it. Or more precisely, he was counting on me valuing family harmony more than my own name. That's not an accident. That's something people learn about you over time from watching how you respond when things get uncomfortable. I don't say this to be hard on myself. I say it because understanding it changed how I move through the world. Being honest, not just technically honest but willing to stand behind what's true when it costs you something, isn't a personality trait some people are born with. It's a practice. It's the decision you make at 7 a.m. when you walk into your manager's office with a folder of receipts instead of a signed confession. You have to choose it, specifically when choosing it is the harder thing. The intelligence piece matters too, and I don't mean IQ. I mean the kind of thinking that made me pull my calendar entries and my Uber receipt and my client emails before I said a single word in my own defense. Connor's plan worked on the assumption that I'd panic, that I'd see the access log and feel guilty by proximity and reach for the fastest exit. A lot of people would have. Panic is loud and it makes you stop thinking. What saved me wasn't luck. It was that I slowed down long enough to reconstruct the timeline and let the facts speak before I opened my mouth. And then the third thing, staying in it. The 3 weeks of review status, eating lunch alone. walking past people who didn't know what to say, not knowing if the firm would ultimately protect me or protect themselves. That kind of sustained uncertainty is its own test, separate from the initial crisis. A lot of people survive the first hit and then quietly give ground over time because the waiting grinds them down. I almost let it. There were nights I thought maybe I should have just signed the form and moved on. The fact that I didn't, not because I'm especially strong, but because I kept returning to the simple truth that I hadn't done anything wrong, is the only reason the badge records had time to surface. Connor forgot one thing. I'm an accountant. I live inside records. And I knew from the beginning that records don't lie. You just have to wait long enough for all of them to show up.